Let me tell you a little bit about him. His last active duty assignment was the Chief of Engineers and the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where he oversaw over $40 billion in programs and led 37,000 civilians and active duty personnel. So if you think he got a busy job, he had a really busy one as the Chief of the Army Corps of Engineers. Among other high-level assignments, he served as the Commanding General of the Army's Accessions Command and commanded the 326th Engineer Battalion, the 101st Airborne Division during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. He's a West Point graduate, earned a master's degree in mechanical engineering at the University of Michigan and a master's in business administration from Long Island University, and he's a registered professional engineer. Currently, he's the Chief of Infrastructure and Executive Development for a worldwide management consulting firm, the Flippin Group. He serves on the board of USAA, so if you're a USAA member, he's part of the leadership of that, and chairs the board of Eagle Creek Renewable Energy. I've got to tell you on a personal note that I not only invited General Van Antwerp because I had the opportunity to work for him and personally observe his extraordinary leadership, his unwavering integrity, and his remarkable commitment to his family. And not only because he's been a mentor to my son, who's a major in the U.S. Army, who happens to be a combat engineer, but he always has a message that communicates truth and applicable truth that you can use and apply to your leadership in whatever station of life you're in. So I consider ourselves very fortunate to have General Van Antwerp with us this afternoon, and I'd ask you to join me in welcoming him with a warm welcome.
Thanks, Art. All right, brother. Thanks, Art. Well, y'all feel free to continue eating, or you can do what we do at our house. I have 13 grandchildren and 5 kids. We just put our plates on our lap, and then we can do whatever we're doing. So, but when you can make eye contact to me, that's better. That's good. You know, it's interesting how guys tend to talk. Art, come up here. You be my demonstrator just for a minute. You know, a lot of times when guys talk, we're kind of like this, shoulder to shoulder, and we'll look over part. But, you know, when women talk together, it's knee to knee. But I like the knee to knee. So if you can do that. But it's a thrill for me to be here. You know, Art, thank you so much for the gracious introduction. My favorite introduction all the time was given to me by one of my boys. I've got 3 boys and 2 girls. My 2 older boys, I'll tell you this as long as I won't leave the room, they're both in Delta Force. It's kind of an elite Army unit. And one of them's a squadron commander there, and the next one's going to lead the unit next summer. So that's what they do. But they asked me to speak at a dining inn. Y'all know what a dining inn is? Do you have that in the Navy? It's where you get your unit together. You don't invite outside people. It's kind of crazy. They play this game on the pool table and other stuff. It's a little raucous, but it was okay. But of course, when you invite your dad to be the speaker, you have to introduce him. So when you all have kids later on, those of you that do, how do you think your children will introduce you? What will you be known for? It's a great question to ask them. Mom or Dad, what do you think of me? You know, when we're doing this, when they're growing up. So my youngest son got the privilege of introducing, because my older son say, you take that. That's what you can do when you're in charge, right? You can have someone else empowered to do it. And so I was very curious what he would say. He got up. It was the shortest introduction I think I've ever received. He said, you know, because I invited my dad to be the guest speaker there, and he's a pretty awesome guy, but I want to introduce my extinguished father. And then he goes, Dad, come on up. So that was it. So I am an extinguished father. That's what I do. You know, I have a lot of grandkids. As I said, I have 13 on the ground, 1 in the hopper right now. The little baby boy's due he's due in October. His name is Jeffrey Thomas. I'm really looking forward. I've seen pictures of him. He's in there moving around and stuff. But when he comes, we're going to rejoice. But I got some advice from my oldest grandchild. She's 12 years old. Her name is Taylor Grace. And she gave me this advice when I was working in the Pentagon. I worked in the Pentagon for 8 years. The Chief of Engineers actually has an office in the District of Columbia because there's an 1823 law on the books that says the Chief of Engineers will never be more than a day's horse ride out of the district. And I went to a senator and said, could you all take care of that? Because a lot of times I'm farther out. And he said to me, no, we won't change it. He said, an airplane is a horse. Okay, so I'm never more than a day's horse ride out of the district. But my granddaughter came when I was still on active duty. I've been retired since 2011. But when you've worked in the Pentagon as long as I did, 8 years, you know there's 2,300 urinals in the Pentagon, for instance. I mean, who knew that? How many of you know that? How many of you know that? And as an engineer, you know, I had the infrastructure, you know, they're renovating it. It took us 3 years to build it during World War II. It's taken about 20 to renovate it. So if you're going to buy an old house, just tear the thing down and start over. It's a lot quicker. But it's very interesting as you go through that. You learn a lot of things about the building. But my granddaughter said, well, Grampy, can we take a little tour? That's what they call us, Granny and Grampy. We're the Beverly Hillbillies, I think. It's good. It's cherished for me when I hear that. But so I'm taking her. I was on the, when you work in the Pentagon and you make general, you're on the E ring. That's the outside ring. For those of you that know your alphabet, the inside ring is A. Inside there's a courtyard. And by the way, that courtyard, it used to have places that you eat. I tell you, on 9/11, and I was not in the building that morning, but I just want to mention, because we just had the anniversary of it, that inner courtyard inside the A ring was where they took everybody that was injured or killed that day. And I spent time in there, and I'll tell a little more about that. But just to finish the story with my granddaughter, because she gave me some advice about doing what we're doing today. I'll pass this on to you. We get right outside my office on the E-ring, and there's a picture. There was a row of pictures. They came from the Museum of Old Generals and Admirals, there. And so she stops at the first picture. Of course, at that time, she was 8 years old, and she was, well, actually, she was probably 7. She was about this height, and you can read the plaques. Right? So she stops at the very first picture. Well, you know how big the Pentagon is? Just to get around one floor. So we weren't going to see much in the hour that we had. But she stops there and she says, you know, Grampy, I had to do a report on a general. So I get down on 1D, which I do for all my grandkids because I want to be eye to eye. And I said, well, tell me about your report. She's 7 years old at the time, right? She said, well, I had to make 3 points. And she goes like this. I said, okay, tell me what they are. Said, well, first of all, he lived a long time ago, just like you, Grampy. I go, second, she did it on Julius Caesar. I didn't even know. Did you know Julius Caesar was a general? She said, he was a general just like you, Grampy. I said, okay. And said, well, what was your third point? Says, well, he used to give long speeches and they killed him. So I'm very conscious of our time. I know that the mids have to be back to class at 20 after. So Kayla, I need a little help. I haven't had an aide for 5 years. Will you come up and be my aide for a second?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. She wouldn't refuse, would she, Admiral? All right. Thank you. So, y'all, I've heard a little bit from your boss, and he thinks you're an amazing person, and I do too, just from hearing. So you're a 2010 graduate of this place, okay? Tell me a little bit about this aid kind of business. Sell it to any of these mids. If they ever had the opportunity, why on earth would you ever want to be an aide? So I'm going to just give you a little.
Okay,
well,
I can also talk real loud, sir. If you
Okay,
want.
talk
That's
real
another
loud.
talent.
All right, she has that. Go ahead.
I would say the best part about being an aide is, as a very junior officer, you know, a lieutenant who graduated in 2010, I get a chance to see what senior leadership in our organization does. So in any other, you know, corporate company, 3-star admiral is an executive there, right?
You bet.
Running the show. And coming back here, it's given me a chance to see the world through his eyes and think about those kind of big, high consequence decisions, awesome. How he uses his team, how he communicates. And I've also learned a lot about the Naval Academy I never knew as a midshipman. I knew who the soup was, didn't know a lot about what he did.
Did you know more about who the commandant was when you were? Yes.
I knew what the commandant was.
They know that. All right, good. Were you ever in trouble with the commandant?
I was not.
Okay, all right.
Straight edge kid.
That sounds good. That sounds good. So you would highly recommend that if they get an opportunity to be an aide somewhere along the line, not do it for 10 years, but to do it to get that experience and see that view.
Absolutely, yes,
okay.
sir.
Outstanding, outstanding. And you work for a great boss. You know
do
that.
Indeed.
It does depend on the boss too. I need you to do something for me.
Happy to help.
Okay, at 10 after, because at 20 after, I want to be done so all the mids can get back to class and they can't say this Army guy went over and we do. So you're going to be my timer, right?
Happy to,
so
sir.
what I'd like you to do is stand up no matter what I'm doing at 10 after in your command voice, which you obviously have. That's great. I want you to say general because I'm an old retired general. So just kind of say general. Thank you for your general remarks because I'm just going to give general remarks today. I'm not going to say anything specific. I'm just going to give general remarks.
Yes,
and
sir.
then I'd like you to say you're generally out of time. You have no more than 10 more minutes.
Yes, sir.
Okay? So do you have that? Do you want to?
I can do that.
Okay, do you want to, should she practice it one time? Just, because now listen, we have,
I'm happy to.
She's happy to do it.
practice
Because we have knowledge and then we gain experience. You don't gain experience till you practice. So
sir.
one time,
Let's do it.
give it to me.
General, sir, your general remarks are done. Or no, thank you for your general remarks. I can do this. You have no more than 10 more minutes.
That's pretty good. Let's go over it one more time. General,
General,
thank you for your general remarks. You're generally out of time, but you have only 10 minutes
It's like
left or
a-
anything like that you want to say.
It's like what do they call those? Yeah, tongue twisters.
You got it. You got it. So,
All right.
or you can just say you're generally out of time. That will work.
I think I
All
can
right.
handle it,
Thanks
sir.
you, Kayla.
We'll get
All right,
there.
I'm counting on you.
Thanks.
If we're late, it's your fault. Just another word about 9/11. My office was destroyed. I left the building at 8:30 in the morning to go over to Crystal City. My good neighbor, Tim Maud, who I shared a wall with, the left wing of the aircraft went through both of our offices. I had 3 people that were in my office when I left, normally 17 people, but we were at an offsite in Crystal City. Of course, when the towers were hit, we all convened around we were at the DoubleTree over there, and we were watching the TVs and wondering what was going on. And then we heard a very loud crash, almost like a sonic boom to us. We went up on the hill. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C. there, went up on the hill that overlooked Crystal City, up by the highway, and what looked like my side of the building, our side of the building, was on fire. It was a renovated part of the building. They had just put sprinkler systems in and everything else. But I lost 2 great people, Cheryl and Barbara, that day. I spent 9/11, I spent about a half a day on the telephone with people that were impacted and the families, those 2 families. I had another soldier that was my exec, and he was injured. He was burned over 60% of his body that day. He went to the restroom. So think about the strategic things you do in your life. But he went to the restroom, so he was on the C wing. Now you know the E, so he was a couple wings in the restroom when the airplane hit. And the fireball actually came down that hallway all the way into the A and B ring. There was scorch marks because it was a fuel fire. It was really hot. And he had just stepped out of the bathroom, and of course, in those days in the Army, we wore a lot of polyester, and he caught fire. And he hit the ground, and thank God it had been a renovated part in the sprinkler system, put him out. And then an angel, who we now know this person's name, he came in through another door, and he said, "Is there anybody in this hallway?" And so Brian, at that point, as he describes it, he was down on his face. His name's Brian Birdwell. He wrote a wonderful book you might want to read. It's called Refined by Fire. Only someone that went through what he did could talk about that. But he was down. He said he had to turn his face sideways to be underneath the black acrid smoke that was in the hallway right there. And then this friend called to his name, crawled to him, grabbed him by the arm, and not to gross you out while you're eating, but a lot of his skin came off, which is very typical of what happens when you're burned. And he was in shock. He really didn't feel the pain yet. But that angel took him to the A ring of the Pentagon, and then they took him in a stretcher out to the road. Another guy, and he was in a Suburban, threw the seats out of his Suburban. Of course, you couldn't drive anywhere except on the sidewalk. They put Brian in the back of the Suburban. The guy just threw his seats out, and Brian was there, and they took him to the burn hospital by driving on the sidewalk. And Brian Birdwell today is a state senator in the great state of Texas. He doesn't go out in the sun much, but we talked for about 2 hours on 9/11. So I don't have PTSD about it, but I tell you, it impacted my life forever. It did, forever. So that's about 9/11. Art had asked me if I'd just say a word. Thank you for not forgetting. Not forgetting. Not that you can if you fly and go through TSA or anything else. Our world's changed. Just wanted to talk about that for a second. I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to reach your hand up as high as you can. Okay. Now, very good. We have one person standing. Now reach your hand up a little bit higher. Go ahead and stand. I love that. Now reach it up a little bit higher. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, go ahead and sit down. Don't fall off your chair. Is there a safety officer in the house? It's great. We need to keep our eye on, she has two things about her. Tell me your first name again.
Elizabeth, sir.
Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. You demonstrate a couple things. Number one, you're in a different uniform than everybody else is, so that is all right. Commandant, is that all right today? I can't say that's all right, but at least it's elegant, that uniform, right? Okay. The other thing she did was stand up. In the world I live in now, we say play to your strengths, but the higher you get, you will find that a lot of times your success, that might have got you there, but what will constrain you at that point are not your strengths, but what we call constraints. And a constraint is anything that holds you or the people you influence back. So I want you just to think about what we just did. Why did most of you not stand? If you think about it, what was it? Well, I'll tell you, the biggest thing is I ask you to raise your hand, and you tend to do that from where you are. Right? And where are you? You're sitting. Okay? So it takes a different mindset. And by the way, we're going to give a book today. It's called Mindset. It's about growth and it's about fixed. A fixed mindset would say, I am going to come from that place where I always am. And I'm very comfortable in the stable world. And then the growth mindset, I'm willing to take some risks. And I'm not busting on any of you that didn't stand. It's rare that someone did. So you're in rarefied air, my dear, here. But the other part of it is everyone, once we saw someone else do it, we became good first followers. The other thing is, even if you sat, if no one would have stood, I wouldn't have said anything at the beginning. I would have still said, raise your hand a little bit higher. Everyone can do that. They always stretch a little bit more. I will tell you that doesn't mean work longer hours. It doesn't mean lose the balance in your family more. It means work smarter. One of the things you can do to work smarter is touch things only one time if you can. So when someone asks me, can we get together and have a phone call? I will say, yes, here's the time that I'm available. Here's my phone number, and I have an iPhone so we could FaceTime, or here's my Skype address. If something in this time, send me a calendar invite and I will be there. That's done. Where's my wife, who I'm not busting on at all, but she likes to have more relational conversation. It might take 5 or 6 times to get to that phone call. Both of those can be good, but in a world where you need efficiencies, try and touch it once. I'm going to talk to you today about 5 things. Kayla, you got the 3 things I asked you to talk about, right? Are you writing those things down, or what are you doing? That's a good aid. But I want to talk to you about 5 things that leaders of leaders need to do, and the great ones do it. This isn't everything that great leaders need to do, but after I retired, and some of you all of you will do that someday. My wife and I went on a retreat. We just took a little retreat. We went to a little bed and breakfast, and it had to be on the water. I don't know why I went to West Point, because I just love the water and I love to sail. I just didn't want to be in a bunk and have half a wall locker. That was the only reason. Other than that, I would have come here. But when we took this little retreat, we said, so what do we want to do in the next chapter? One of the things we said, what has God prepared us to do? Because I didn't want to, I'm not going to throw away the fact that I'm an engineer, because that determines a lot of how I think. So it ended up, part of that ended up, I'm chairman of the board of a hydropower company, because the Corps of Engineers generates a little hydropower for this nation. In fact, they're the single largest generator. So it was a natural. So we didn't want to throw that away, but really wanted to get what space, what is it we're going to do? And so here's what my wife's personal mission statement is. I call this PMS. I have PMS too. I have a PMS. It's a personal mission statement. Don't react to that incorrectly. But hers is to come alongside people that are running really hard and encourage them. So she's an encourager. Mine is this: to ignite a passion for leadership growth in leaders of leaders. Why do I say leaders of leaders? Do I not like to lead people that lead followers? I do. But you only have so much time on this earth. When you lead followers, that's addition. When you lead leaders, it's multiplication. So I am looking. That's why I'm here. When Art said this, I put that through the filter. Are these leaders of leaders or potential leaders of leaders? Absolutely. I mean, got the superintendent, that's leaders, got the commandant, got other admirals and generals and colonels, and then we got mids, and you all are gonna, someday, my generation's gonna be gone, and you're gonna be it. And so, leaders of leaders. So I wanna give you these 5 things that are on my heart for leaders of leaders. It's not the exhaustive list, as I said, there could be others, but these are the 5. The first one, it's the word vision. It's around the word vision. I want to ask you, how many of you do jigsaw puzzles? Do you do jigsaw? Any of you? We love to do jigsaw puzzles. I highly recommend it when you get a family. Here's what we do. We started out when the kids were little, you know, those little puzzles that have a little thing you can grab a hold of. There's maybe 12 pieces. They got to fit in their own slot. It's really cool. We got a lot of those still around because I got those youngsters. But now we are into the 2,000 piece puzzle. And we lay out, we've gone from a card table puzzle to we've got a much bigger table that we lay out this and we put all the pieces out there. So let me ask you, Admiral Carter, what is the most important part of a jigsaw puzzle? What do you think?
The corners.
Okay, got the corners. Commandant, what do you think it is? You can't say corners yet. Well, you can. Do you agree with him or not?
I always agree.
Oh, you always agree. Really? I would not have expected anything. But let me tell you one truth. Don't always agree with him. He needs your voice. No, what would you say? The edges. The edges, okay. The edges, okay. Admiral, what would you say?
The last piece.
The last one, ooh, it's very important. I hate it when we get to the end and one of the grandkids is taking a piece and it's under the credenza or something. Let me tell you, the most important part, though, is the box top. It's the box top. What leaders do is paint pictures. They draw the box top. And I can prove it to you because 2 Thanksgivings ago, we were having one of our big deals. We had all these puzzle pieces out there. I switched box tops. Now, I told you what my 2 boys do. This is a really risky business in our family when you cross the boys. I mean, it's kind of known, okay, you're going to get a battle. So, and I changed, you probably have heard this guy named Thomas Kincaid. He paints all these wonderful light pictures coming in all over. And then there's a guy called Wayan that paints murals over in Hawaii. Well, those murals, a lot of times when they're translated to a puzzle piece, they are oval and not rectangular or square. So I switched from the actual puzzle, which was a rectangle, to an oval puzzle that didn't look anything like it. That was the box top I put out. And of course, here's what I did, because I'm dastardly. I would go to my bedroom where I had the real box top, and I would go and study it and come back and know, okay, the red part of the cottage is in the lower left-hand corner. And I would go find 5 or 6 pieces to that cottage, and I put them together and walk away. Well, how frustrating was it for everybody else? Because the box top was the wrong one, right? So what do? Leaders paint pictures. They make it very clear. Let me ask you, who do you think is the non-military greatest visionary maybe ever to walk this planet? Who comes to mind? Well, again, if you have a bunch of grandchildren, you are going to go to Disney World pretty frequently. In fact, we go every 2 years, whether the kids like it or not. I am going there. We are going again this year because I love it. Interesting enough, when I was chief of the Army Corps of Engineers, I took my top engineers to Disney World. And we met with their engineers. You know what they call their engineers? Imagineers. Imagineers. Because they will take an idea that Walt Disney had, or now the new leadership of Disney, because Walt has passed, and they will take that idea, combine it with imagination, artistry, engineering, and all of a sudden you have a ride that is like an elevator falling and it's dropping 36 inches in the ride and you feel like you've dropped 15 floors. Who does that kind of stuff? So I took my engineers there, and after we talked, my engineers, I gathered them all together. We had a little after-action review. What did you hear? What impact will it have on us? What did we learn from them? What could we steal from them? And we also shared some ideas with them that helped them on some of their water rides, incidentally. Pretty cool. But my engineers said, we need to be called something different than just engineers. I go, okay, well, I said, somebody put a butcher paper up there. Let's just start throwing out names. Let's see what sticks. What one of the guys says, you know what we really do? We're solutioneers. We go out to America's waterways, to the dams, to the infrastructure of America, and we solve those problems. So that got written in big letters there, and forevermore, I think an engineer, if you say, what do you really do in the Corps of Engineers? I'm a solutioneer. But Walt Disney, when Disney World, I had the privilege of going to Disney World when they cut the ribbon. Walt had already passed away on it, and so his wife of many, many years was going to give the keynote. I want to just tell you a little bit how that went down. You know, have you been to Disney World? Any of you been there? You know, there's that little turning circle, and then you look down, and there's the castle. And so they set up just on the main street, just down from the turning circle there, they set up kind of the podium and all that was a little platform up, and there was 4 people up on it. CEO was sitting next to Mrs. Disney, and I could see them talking. I was kind of in the background. I always wonder what's said during those times in there, and so they had a good conversation. She was smiling and laughing, and so was he. Well, he gave up and gave his kind of introductory speech, and then he introduced Mrs. Disney, and they had prepared a notebook. She was in her mid to late 70s. They had prepared a 3-inch notebook like they give superintendents to give speeches, right? And but she left it under her chair when she got up to the podium. It's kind of interesting. So very awkward moment. The CEO kind of gives it and casually starts to hand it to him. She goes, like, I don't need it. I don't need it. I'm going off script. And so, very interesting. The first thing she did, and I'll kind of mimic as best I can, she got up to the podium before she said any words. She was just introduced. She turned her back to the audience and she looked at the castle. And when she turned around, her face was just lit up. And then she said, I just had a conversation with our CEO up here. And you know what he said to me? He said, oh, I wish Walt were here to see this now. And she did one more look at the castle and turned around. I just want all of you to know he did see this. So what Walt Disney did, and through his lifetime, because he grew up where they made cartoons and you would draw one and then you'd draw a little change and you'd flip them real quick and it would look like it was moving. That's where he came from. So on the back of napkins, literally on the back of envelopes, on these little sheets that made cartoons, he drew out, and the record's there. So when Disney World, they cut the ribbon, he had seen it already. How do we translate that? That's vision. That's vision. The second thing I want to talk to you about is influence. Influence. John Maxwell would say the simplest, most straightforward definition of leadership is influence. Taking people where they might not go on their own, but you influence. Our little stand-up thing, because one person stood later on, we were all kind of influenced to do that. That's the effect we can have on people when we're leaders. I don't ever use PowerPoint slides. Do you have PowerPoint slides here at the Academy? And try not to, okay. First thing, I don't, because I had some experiences with people that spent hours and hours on a single PowerPoint slide that when I would look at it, you need hours and hours to explain it. I would just say, turn it over and talk to me. And the higher I got where I could just say that, I said, you can give me 5 slides as a read ahead, but be prepared when you come into my office. I'm going to turn that thing upside down. We're going to talk about this. I want to know what you think. Put your time in on that. But now I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth because I have a PowerPoint slide with me. Here it is. Do you see it? Do you see it, Anna?
Sir, I see the outline.
That's it. Okay, now we're going to put some words on it, all right? There's 4 words on this. Carefully. I could do this. I have a son that speaks Arabic and one that speaks Farsi. I could go from either angle or bottom to top. I have a little Chinese. But I'm going to go into English for you all at the Naval Academy here, all right? The first word is attitude on this. And then there's a little dash that goes to the next word that's behavior. And the third word with a little dash in between is influence. And the fourth word is outcomes. So think about this. Here's my slide. I want you to think more about the slide than what you see on the slide. But your attitude determines your behavior, which determines your influence, which determines outcomes. Do you believe that? I want you to test that out. How did you feel when you woke up this morning about what you were going to do today? Let me talk about the word attitude. It starts there. That's why it's the first word on my chart. Because what follows from that is how I behave because of that attitude. By the way, there's going to be a lot of circumstances in your life. 9/11 was when I had to choose what my attitude was going to be after that. And there's been hundreds of opportunities in my life to either have a good attitude or have what a lot of people, when they say, you have an attitude, right? That's not good. So I have, this is a broad generality. Forgive me for that, but there's basically 3 types of attitudes that people exhibit in this world. And I'm 66 years old, so give me a little grace in this. But the first one are people, and this is the lowest form of attitude, people that say, I have to. They will use words like that. When I interview somebody, and I've interviewed a lot of people for jobs over the years at very high positions. And when I always ask questions that get at how do you feel about the work that you're in right now? And when I hear, well, I have to do this, and I have to do this, or I had to do that, I tell you, The next level up on attitude are people that want to. I like people that say, I want to. But I'm going to check your motivation. Why do you want to? Do you want to because of selfishness, or do you want to because of selflessness? Which I think there's a reason we use the word service. And that's going to be the third word that I'll talk about in a second. So, attitude. But what's the highest form? The highest form is get to. I get to. What do I get to do today? I'll tell you how I woke up today. I called my wife. We always do a little devotional together when we're apart. We do it over the phone. And then the question comes, what do you get to do today, babe? And she says, I know what you get to do. I said, you're going to have an awesome time, aren't you? I said, you better believe it. I said, look who I get to talk with. Look who I get to be with today. And although it's not my favorite academy, it is one of my favorite academies. All right? So it's a get to. If you wake up every day, if you go to the next class and some of you going, I dread that, start working on your attitude. Say, there is something there that you're going to get out of that. And tell you, the toughest jobs I had in the military, because I went with them at a get-to attitude, I think I got a lot more out of them. So if you don't remember anything else, maybe you'll change your attitude today if you have a have to or a want to a get to. Okay, it makes a difference. And of course, what comes from there is your behavior. And by the way, leadership is 99% behaviors. People like to follow confident leaders. This is the business I'm in now. And I work with, well, one of my CEOs out at McKesson. He made $32 million last year. That's a lot more than many of us will ever make in our lifetime. And that's without bonuses and all the other things. But he wants coaching because every day is a get-to for him. He's turned that around. When I go to meetings, and part of what I get to do, which is really cool, when I'm coaching somebody like that at that level, I get to sit in on staff meetings, and I'll just show up at their headquarters unannounced and say, what meeting? I'll find out if the boss is going to be in. Say, what meeting's he in? I just want to sit on the wall. You start to find out the person's attitude and the behaviors that come from that. And you don't think that pours out into the influence over the people you are? Lou Holtz, who's a guy I love, I've heard him talk a ton of times. Lou will tell you this about inspiration and motivation. He says your inspiration comes from your attitude. And then he always talks about motivation for you coaches in here. He'll say, you know, I don't really look to motivate my players. I look to get motivated players. But I don't look to motivate them. They have to want to be like Steph Curry in basketball. He's going to shoot 300 three-pointers before the game starts because he knows that practicing perfect makes perfect. By the way, Art and I talked a little about this. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. You have to practice the perfect thing to make it perfect. You get the kind of double speak there. So, and then what comes out of that behavior, and there's a lot of, the company I'm in right now, we have a 360 that measures 37 behaviors, leadership behaviors. By the time we get done seeing that for people, we can tell pretty closely what kind of leaders they are. So my third word is service. Service. Wow, how cool it is that that's what we're in. We get to serve. By the way, I was only going to do 5 years out of the academy. That was my obligation. 39 years later, they're kicking me out, right? Wouldn't change it, wouldn't change it. I know a lot of people that I talked to, wow, I got out at 25, and if it works for you and that's the right thing, but a lot of them said I pulled the trigger too early on that. I could have stayed till 30 or whatever. So service. Service is kind of an interesting thing. I'll tell you, I had a chaplain. Chaplain, thank you for what you do. It's not easy in this world that we're in. But I had a chaplain, his name was Tommy Preston. This was Desert Storm going back to the early 90s. He preached one Sunday morning. We had our little thing in our Haji tents there and everything, and he talked about washing feet, and told the story about Jesus washing the disciples' feet, and then he said, I challenge all of you to wash your soldiers' feet. I had no idea how that was going to play out, but I remember writing in a little notebook, wash my soldiers' feet. I had about 600 soldiers over there, all males. It was had the 326 engineers, 101st Airborne Division, and we were way out to the west edge, along with the French Foreign Legion. That's a whole nother story in itself, if you ever get to work with those kind of folks. But it was a 100-hour war. You all know the history of it. But there was something we had to do after, where I really had an opportunity to wash soldiers' feet. And we had to have our vehicles cleaned to get through the agricultural inspection to be able to bring them home. And the engineer battalion, we set up 21 wash racks. We bought everything that could, every kind of pump that would pump water hard so we could clean these vehicles off, and got all the materials, set up 21 wash racks, had a plan for how long each unit, of course an engineer unit's got a lot of heavy junk. So our unit, we were 7 days, 24 hours a day on the wash rack, and then we had to get off. Every unit had a time slot. A division's a big organization. And if you didn't make your time slot and you didn't get everything done, you didn't pass, guess where you went? The end of the line. So it was going to determine, the division commander had made it so it would determine when you go home as how you do that one part. I'm going, wow. And then how much that, I tell you, I had crews out all over making sure those pumps work, because people were going to be on our neck all the time. Well, my sergeant major and I were out on the third day. We were out looking at our unit, and it was late in the afternoon, and we, underneath a bucket loader with one of those wands, high-powered wand, this guy was asleep. The mud was about up to here, if you can envision. If I laid on my back and the mud was here and I was holding this wand, but I was dead asleep, that's what he was. So we had miscalculated one thing, the human dimension. So my sergeant major turns to me. So all of you, you're going to have people like this in your lives that are truth tellers. Ma'am.
General, sir, thank you for your general remarks, but you're generally out of time. You have 10 minutes left.
Thank you very much. Give her a hand. All right. You can make a lot of things. You probably make more money. You can have more kids. You can do a lot more of other stuff, but you can't make more time. You can't. Anyway, my sergeant major turns to me and said, sir, we got a problem here. I go, yeah, that I see. All right. And then he said, we got some people in this battalion that haven't washed a single vehicle. And I go, oh, who are they? He goes, you, me, all the company commanders, the first sergeants. And he said, we got to give these guys a rest. And so right then, I go, Sergeant Major, make that happen. So he said, okay, we're going to take a 12-hour shift, 6 to 6. We're going to send all these people back home and go to bed. And then they're going to come out charging for the next thing. And they're going to know their leadership cares about them. I translate that, we were washing feet, soldiers' feet, right there. Fast forward, we made it. We got to come home, right? When I changed command there, I think one of the reasons I'm a general is because General P, who was our division commander, sat on my board later on. But you sit on a board, you know somebody that can keep you from getting promoted, or they know you and that can get you promoted. So it works both ways. But when I left, guess what General P talked about? Didn't talk at all about the 100-hour war. He talked about, because at 2 o'clock in the morning, he was with his sergeant major on our line when my sergeant major and I and all the company commanders were washing vehicles. And I heard him coming down the line. Well, Sergeant Major, what are you doing out here? Well, and then I was saying, I don't know, should I get on the other side of the vehicle so he doesn't see me or not? I just said, how you doing, sir? We're just taking a shift here. He goes, very interesting. Why are you doing that? I said, because we had to give the guys a rest. We had everything down pat, except we didn't have the human dimension. Guess what he talked about? The change of command. That was it. And he relates the story a lot. That's service. The fourth thing, that was 3, right? Are you tracking with me? It's vision, it's influence, it's service. The fourth thing is about development of people, or just development. A lot of you on the faculty and coaches, there's a couple people in my life that were coaches early on that developed me. There was a teacher, her name was Mrs. Muchmore. She could have been on a James Bond film, probably. She was 55 years old. I thought she was ancient of days when I was in the 4th grade. She was amazing. She came to almost every one of my promotions until she passed away 6 years ago. Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff. But when you think about development of people, tell you there's kind of 3 ways it's done. One way it's done, the Socrates-Plato method. You got the real brilliant leader and they're teaching and doing that. That's okay, but you don't get much experience when you do that. Another one's like we had at West Point. I'm not exactly sure the system used here, but we used the Thayer method. That's where, and I taught mechanical engineering up there, we would give the assignments. You'd have to come in the next day and recite on the board, back in our day, and the teacher, professor would be able to tell how much you dug out on your own and how much you knew. That one thing in my life, you can tell me just go out and do great and wonderful things. I am going to start with that white sheet of paper and I'm going to define the problem and I'm going to put the problem on the board. That was a gift that West Point gave me. The other way is what my father did. It's called the apprentice, and what's the other part of that? The craftsman. And he did it with cars, first of all, but he did it in a lot of ways. But we used to work on cars. I was one of the only guys, probably in my town, that had a grease pit in the garage in their house, because I got to design that in when I was 15. My father built a house. He said, Van, what do you want here? I already had the car. I couldn't drive it legally yet. But I said, I want a grease rack in the garage. He said, okay, design it and do it. So I built it. It had stairs down. It had lights down there. I rolled a steel plate over so my mom wouldn't fall in it when she's just walking out the garage. We had shelves with so we could put everybody's oil filters. All my friends had their oil filters and oil and stuff up there. Wow, it was awesome. But on that grease rack, here's how it started. My dad would do the work, I'd hand him the tools. Then we'd switch around. I'd do the work, he'd hand me the tools. And then he'd be drinking coffee, I'd be doing the work. That's how it works. So what do I tell you? Don't ever work alone if you want to build and develop people. I'm going to tell you my Admiral story. I worked for Admiral Bill Owens, who's the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, way back when. People probably still know of him. I know Admiral Carter knows of him. He's a great man. Weird guy because he spent 12 years underwater on a submarine. So you're just weird. We did his retirement here at the Naval Academy. He's just an awesome guy. But I'll tell you what he did for me. I was his exec. It was the hardest 15 months I ever had, but it was a get-to like unbelievable for me. I saw whether I could actually operate at the level I would be called upon to operate some years later. Here's what he did for me. I remember one incident particularly. We were going into the sex def's office. Actually, I wasn't going in. He was going in because there was gatekeepers. I wasn't on the roster to get in. Execs didn't go to those meetings. I'll tell you what Admiral Owens did as we got near the door. He turns to me, says, get up close to me. So I do. Okay. It's kind of weird. I'm up here close. He grabs the front of my belt. And we start walking through this door. Of course, there's people there with rosters, and they're going, okay, Admiral Owens, check, not check, who's this, whatever. and said, well, Admiral, there's not a place for him in here. And the Admiral says, and I'll never forget this, and I don't know exactly who it was, but they had to be shocked when he said that. He goes, you see these buns? I'm only going to take up half a chair. He's got the other half. He's coming in. He's coming in. And so I'm right up behind him, and we go in. You know what comes out of those meetings when you do that? Van, what'd you think about what the SecDef said in there? Van, why don't you go down and see Gordon Sullivan, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and talk to him about the discussion in there? I would have never been able to do that. You know, sometimes I'd tell him what I thought, and he'd go, well, that's one way of looking for. That was where I got my cue. You're way off. But we had that banter. Had I not been with him, I would have never learned it. The last thing I want to do in closing, I want to just give you one more thing. Leaders have high standards. I give a lot of grace, but a standard with all my grandkids, we have a bin of Legos. The thing's got to be worth a couple of $1,000s, because you know, you buy a little Lego, it's like this, it's $50 today. I wish I would have invented Legos. And inline roller skates too. I wish I would have done that. We have a bin. You know, they started out, they were little boxes with directions and everything, but now I got creative kids. You know what happens with that bin? Well, you got to find the little man with the hat that you're looking for with these thousands of people. It gets dumped upside down. I mean, it's a big bin from Walmart, right? And so, but the standard is anything we have can be out all day long. But when we get ready for dinner, it's pickup time. And we're going to do that as a team. Now, I resourced it a little bit. I bought a bunch of dustpans. You know, you can pick up a lot of Legos with a dustpan. My big mistake was I had different sizes, and they're all fighting over the biggest dustpan. But we can pick up a bin of Legos in 2 minutes flat. But that's our standard. And when we talk, the other standard is we don't complain about when Grampy says it's time to eat, everybody knows, okay, let's pick up the Legos. I don't have to say that next part, because that's our standard. But I want to tell you about a guy named John Scalinos. John coached baseball at the college level for 43 years. You may know his name. If you're into the baseball world at all, you do. John was 78 when he gave this speech in 1996 at the Grand Ole Opry. He had 4,000 coaches come in from the Baseball Coaches Association. He comes out on stage. He had retired. He was about 5 years away from coaching by that time. He comes out, he's got a home plate strapped to his neck. Of course, everybody's going, this guy has lost his marbles. 78 years old. So he talked for about 20 minutes. He did not, what is he doing? Is he just wearing that because this is baseball and he thought that'd be a nice necklace or whatever? And then he said, I guess you're wondering why I'm wearing this. This is one of the greatest speeches of all time, I think, about standards. And he said, any Little League coaches in here? How wide's this plate? Anyone know how wide the home plate is? It's 17 inches. 17. Then he went up to Babe Ruth. How wide's the plate? 17 inches. They went up all the way through up to the big leagues. There was a bunch of big league coaches in there. How wide's the plate? 17 inches. And he said, well, then how come when you have some great player, but they don't meet your standards, why do you widen the plate? Why do you make it for them? Even in the Little League, we don't, because they don't get a hit, we don't make it 20 inches. The standard's 17 inches. And then he did something really unique. Of course, the plate looks a little bit like a house if you turn it upside down, put the peak on top. He drew some windows in the door. He said, what are our standards for our family at home? So we have our standards that we have. We put those in place. And then he took it again and he put an American flag on it. He said, so what are our standards in school for education? What's our 17 inches? And then he drew a little cross and said, what's our standard in churches in that? And then he just asked the question, are you going to set the standard or are you going to have low standards? And here's what I've learned in my passing, that if you have low standards, it's going to be real hard to hold people accountable. But if you have high standards, people will be accountable and they'll think it's a get-to do it. So I leave you with that. I want to do one last thing. I want you to put out your arm. I'll tell you, these tables, watch this arm, okay? Do this. I can't order you. Will you please do this? Put your arm out and do like this. Go. go do it. Okay, this group like this, okay. All right. Now, watch me very carefully. I want you to bring it in and put it right in on your chin, just like that. Go ahead. How many of you have it on your cheek? What did I say? Some of you did this. I saw you. I saw you. What is the picture there? You are in a glass house, and you ought to embrace it. It's a wonderful thing. But as far as standards goes and all these other things, you can either set the example in it or you won't. If you give them a conundrum, you say, I do this, but I do something else. Guess what the default is most of the time? It's what you did. So when you're setting your standards, I would say, do what's right, and if you have to, use words. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you for the privilege of doing this.